next is what I frame as a neutral puppet technique, because I'm borrowing that idea of the neutral puppet from neutral mask work. Now, neutral mask work is about looking at the performer's body in relationship to the mask as much as it is as looking at how mask performers can use masks, and this is a similar technique. So they're very, very simple puppets. The puppet itself is just a piece of cloth with a knot tied in the end of it. So this is as simple as an object as you can have, and the idea, the principle of this is to operate the head and put the focus into the head and have essentially an arm and also have a sense of a body shape underneath that, and then to play with that in different ways and animate that body. The difference to this in terms of technique and focus, which I often say to students is the simplest way of showing this technique, is if this puppet was to look into the camera and I'm looking through it, you look at the focus in a different way, as if I look to the camera, then I look through the puppet, and then I look into the camera. There's too many things going on there. So you keep your focus on the head of the puppet, and that means you can operate the puppet convincingly, and also you're suggesting to the audience that's where the focus should lay. But mostly these techniques here are about looking at how you can understand your body in relationship to the object, which is really important for the puppeteer. And part of that is the distance between you and the object, and creating a sense of distance between you, but also giving that focus, thinking about the weight of the object, and thinking about how you animate it. Now, we've got some volunteers today who are going to have a go at this, and they have had to go. They are puppeteers and performers as well, so they know a little bit about this technique, so they're going to have a go, and I will give some adjustments as they're doing it. But essentially the technique is about putting that focus into the head of the puppet and moving it, and we will work from that. Okay guys, so what I want you to do is to have a little bit of distance between you and the desk. And what you're going to all do is get a sense of each other as performers, and you're all going to pick the puppet up at the same time. So you make the approach at the same time. And the unity of that is something that's really, really pleasurable for the audience, but also it's nice for you as performers to get a sense of each other. So when you're picking the puppet up, it's all at the same time. Do you want to have a quick go at that? And just start animating once you've all got the puppet up in the air. That's lovely. You've got a great sense of focus there, guys. Now what we're going to do is I'm going to come a little bit closer, and I want them just to stay where they are, but I want them to become very, very interested in me as a collective. So put that focus through the head of the puppet towards me, so it's looking at me. A little bit more obvious, Rory. So bring your puppet up a little bit in the air as well. That's better. And now they're really intensely looking at me, so almost like a cartoon look. So they're like pushing their physicality forward to be interested in me. And now I've got one of my hands behind my back, and you're going to have to use your peripheral vision to do this. So keep concentrating on the head of the puppet, try not to look at anything else. And when I bring my hand out, you're going to try and follow that with the head of the puppet. So put your concentration back into the head of the puppet. Okay. And look at what that does to the head of the puppet if that hand goes down. And suddenly goes up again and goes down. That's really nice. Okay, now what we're going to do an adjustment on is with the puppet, this sort of puppet, if you look, that is essentially, I know it's just a piece of cloth with a knot in the end of it, but think about where its feet would be, and kind of, if it helps to put your hand on there, what you're going to try and do is keep that position of the cloth in that position, if you know what I mean, that relative to the floor, so it looks like it's got a whole form there. Does that make sense? Yeah? And now you can start moving them again. So you can just start walking them towards the edge of the table. See if you can just, with that position that you've got, just create a sense of a walk in that object. Lovely, some really good. And bring them back again. They decide that it's a little bit too scary on the edge here because there's like a big drop here, so they want to go back. Don't let them fall down there, Polly. Keep it up a bit higher. So one thing you've got to do with the principle of this is you've always got to keep a kind of mark of where you think the base of that puppet is. Okay, and relax. Great. So this is what I call a practice puppet, and with my undergraduate students, I give these to all of those students because they need puppets to go away and work on manipulation techniques at home or in their own time. And it's an extension of what I call that neutral puppet. It's again just a very simple square of material with a piece of dowel going into a polystyrene head, holding that in place. So again, it's a very simple puppet, but even with this kind of puppet, you can go a little bit further in terms of using the head and different techniques for how you're going to manipulate that puppet. And that's why I use these types of puppets. There is a very historical reference point to this, which is a Russian puppeteer called Sergei Abraxov, who would use heads like this, but in his technique was for glove puppetry. Here we're using these as rod puppets, and we're moving on to another rod puppet, which would be Humphrey in a minute. Okay, so Donna, if you want to have what we do, you have a go at that one, and the same thing as we did with the other puppet, if you can just manipulate that puppet, bring it up a little bit higher, that's it. But again, with that hand on it. Wonderful. And just start manipulating that. And it can start to be, start that walk. It's kind of aware of my presence. It's aware of the cameras. And it's walking into the space of the camera. Nice. And relax. Lovely. Thank you, Donna. Okay, so now Rory's going to come in and we're going to do a little bit more of this working with this technique and with this kind of practice puppet. So this time, what I'm going to give you, Rory, is something a little bit different to do, is you're going to put a bit of life into this object, listening to your breath and just simply allowing that breath to go into the puppet. With that, you're going to be quite subtle about it, and then all you're going to do is let that puppet wake up and come to a standing position. And see how that goes. And don't worry about getting it wrong, just have a go. Lovely. Just relax a minute. Everything was great, and I really like the way because I can see from the techniques that you've learned from David as well, looking at the idea of putting the breath into the object. But this point here, I'm just going to give you a little extra task, is when it sits up, try and get a sense of it having a centre, and then going to the next stage, which is up. And sort of, with puppetry, and I guess with physical theatre performance as well, you're often kind of breaking down movement into bits and chunks, so it kind of is readable to the audience, and particularly with puppetry, especially with these ones as well, because they're so simple as puppets. So just have a go from that point of the breath going into the sitting up. Lovely. And relax, lovely. Nice one. So what I'm going to do, you're going to try and have a go at all the things that we've just done. So you're going to put breath into the puppet, it's going to sit up, and then it's going to start reading the newspaper. Yeah? Do you want to just have a go at that? Okay, and relax. This is why these puppets are really useful. It's about your relationship to the object. But once your focus gets really intense onto the object, what happens is your head starts to get very close to the head of the puppet. And as a sort of theatrical principle, it's good to keep a little bit of distance between your head and the head of the puppet, because what happens is it's very difficult for the audience to suspend their disbelief, when they're seeing those two heads together. And it's something that I'm constantly saying to students of puppetry as well, because when you lift it up, sort of try and, the best thing to do is not to bend your back in that way, is to bend your knees more, and it will keep your head out of the way of the puppet's head. Don't worry about using your own fingers if you need to. We know they're there. But there was something that you did which is very interesting, where this is something that happens in mask performance as well as puppet performance, where the materiality of the object becomes so obvious that it breaks it breaks its reality, or its illusion of reality, let's say. So there was that wonderful thing that you did, which was brilliant, when you scratched its head and went, but any sense of this being other than a polystyrene ball is completely dispelled in that moment. But I'm so glad you did that, because it's a brilliant little thing for me as well, because that is now definitely gone back to being the material thing that it is. So in mask and in sort of puppet performance, often what you do is you would just have a kind of fake thing of doing that and not making the sound, because the sound makes that polystyrene ball concrete and tangible. Right, brilliant. Okay, so this is Humphrey. Humphrey is like a brother to me now. I've had Humphrey for about over 20 years. Humphrey was originally made for a show about the Industrial Revolution. The structure of the puppet and the way the puppet is built is based on the puppets that Little Angel Marionette Theatre use, and they're called rod puppets or tabletop puppets, this kind of puppet. And essentially, Humphrey has a rod that goes into his head, and that rod controls him very simply to be able to move his head in that way. And then you can put rods on the hands with a puppet like this, but I prefer Humphrey to have a human hand on it, so it's very obvious where the manipulation is happening for the puppet. His feet have some lead weights inside them, and that means Humphrey can be operated and create his own kind of walk with one puppeteer. But the technique that we're going to do in a minute is the technique that is usually done with these kind of tabletop puppets with two puppeteers. And so we're just going to explore that little bit of manipulation to finish off this section. Rory, can you take the head, and Donna, can you take the feet? One of the ways of getting a convincing performance from this puppet is to have Donna's keeping the feet on the floor, but Rory, you have to pull up. And when you pull up, he starts to have his own sort of spine. You don't have to pull up like, with loads of, but you feel that, can you feel that tension between you and Donna? That's the kind of way it should feel when she's moving. And then his knees won't sink and his hips won't sink, and he won't look like he's kind of, I don't know, a bit drunk or a bit worse for wear. Okay, and he's noticed that newspaper now. So let's see him noticing that newspaper, Rory. A little bit more. So relax again. That's almost physically impossible for him to do. It'd be amazing if a human being could do that. But because he's he's representing a human being, this puppet now. So there, he does need to get down onto that position. So let yourselves work that out. It's a little bit of a problem to work out, and then you can start having a look through the paper. Yeah. So go back to that bit you were there doing there. Better, yeah, so he's going to sit down and have a little look. Don't worry about using your fingers, Rory, doesn't matter. Just grab it, be really obvious, that's it. Don't forget his head though. Keep his head engaged. Okay, relax, good. You guys are doing a hell of a lot there. And as you can see, with two people, what you're listening to is you're listening to that tension in the object. Often you're following where the head and the chest is going, but often you're looking for the centre of that puppet as well and where it's going. So this is where puppets are very similar to clowns, and in a lot of technique that I've learned over the years is often with a silent puppet, as Humphrey is at the moment, there's this tendency for him to open his thoughts up by looking up. So he's looking at an article in the newspaper, he's looking up, he's inviting the audience to come into his thought processes, and he's going back to that. And he's inviting them back again. And it's very similar to how clowns often do that in performance and in physical theatre, whereby they'll invite an audience by looking at the audience and looking out to the audience and drawing them into their thoughts. So puppets, in a similar way to how clowns operate, can do that kind of thing.